Hello. My name is Jareen Carr, daughter, consultant, family scapegoat. $500,000 vanished. Stolen. Not by a stranger, but by someone I once called blood. And when I spoke up, they didn't just silence me, they erased me. This isn't a story about money. It's about what happens when a family protects a lie louder than they love the truth. Christmas lights blinked against the desert night, their reflections dancing across rows of polished glass and smiling faces. The scent of roasted ham and cedar candles lingered in the air, too sweet, too heavy. I could hear laughter bubbling through the patio, rising and falling like waves I no longer belonged to. I had told myself to show up, to be civil, to pretend this family still had room for me. But deep down, I knew why I came. I wasn't there to celebrate. I was there to be heard, for once. My fingers curled tighter around the stem of my wine glass as I spotted Dorian near the fire pit. Perfect hair, perfect grin, perfect lie. He held court easily, surrounded by relatives who adored him for reasons I still couldn't understand. My mother, Marla, glowed beside him, her hand on his arm like he was her son instead of mine. My father, Harlan, nodded proudly, laughing too loudly, pretending the man standing in that halo of string lights hadn't stolen everything. The toast came like a knife disguised as a compliment. To Dorian, Uncle Ralph declared, lifting his glass. The man who saved the family business. The room erupted in cheers. My heart stopped. Saved? He didn't save it. He drained it, drained me. The laughter sounded far away, muffled by the pounding in my ears. I could see his smirk across the patio, the way he looked at me when no one else was watching. He knew what he did. And worse, he knew no one would believe me. I stood up before my courage could fade. My voice came out quiet at first, shaky but sharp. You didn't save this family, I said. You stole from me. The chatter stopped. Even the music seemed to hold its breath. Dorian turned, confusion painting his face like a well-practiced mask. Jareen, he said smoothly, you agreed to the investment. Don't twist it now. It's Christmas. I pulled the folded statements from my bag, paper trembling in my hand. There was no agreement, I said. This is a forgery. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then came the whispers. Someone gasped. Someone laughed nervously. Marla's heels clicked across the marble, her perfume slicing through the air like cold metal. Not tonight, Jareen, she said, voice sharp and motherly all at once. Please don't embarrass yourself. I'm not embarrassing myself, I replied. I'm telling the truth. She leaned in, eyes narrow, lips curling into that smile she used when she wanted to cut without leaving marks. Don't be so jealous, honey. It's Christmas. Let it go. Jealous. The word hit harder than the lie. My throat tightened. Around us, people shifted awkwardly, pretending to check their phones or sip their drinks. No one spoke. No one moved. Dorian sighed theatrically. She's been under a lot of stress, he said to the crowd, playing the role of patient cousin. She's been struggling since the loan didn't go through. I forgive you, Jareen. We all make mistakes. I could feel the ground tilting beneath me. His pity was worse than his theft. Don't do this, I whispered. You know what you did. He smiled, a quiet, private smirk meant just for me. Prove it, he said. The words landed like a dare. Marla turned to the guests, waving her hand dismissively. Everyone, let's just enjoy the night, she said. We'll handle this later. No one met my eyes. Not my father. Not even my aunt, who once called me the steady one. I looked around at faces I had known my entire life, faces that now looked at me like I was contagious. I thought the ground had fallen away, I whispered to myself. But it wasn't the ground, it was family. The air felt too heavy to breathe. I set the glass down, barely realizing how tight my grip had become until I saw the faint crack along the rim. My hand shook as I turned and walked toward the door. No one stopped me. Not even Marla. Outside, the night was cold, crisp in a way only Arizona could be in December. I could still hear the muffled laughter behind me as I crossed the patio. The sound was brittle, like glass trying not to break. I kept walking, down the stone steps, past the glowing lights that had once meant comfort. My heels clicked against the pavement, each sound echoing like a heartbeat I didn't recognize. When I reached my car, I turned back one last time. Through the sliding glass doors, I saw my mother laughing again. Dorian poured her another glass of wine. They looked like a painting, beautiful, untouchable, false. The papers trembled in my hand. I wanted to tear them, to throw them in the wind, but I couldn't. They were the only proof I had left that I wasn't crazy. They didn't defend him because they loved him, I whispered into the night. They defended him because they didn't believe me. I opened the car door, the chill of the handle biting against my skin. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, notifications lighting up the screen. I glanced down. A message preview, family first, keep the peace. A new group chat. I wasn't in it. I laughed, quiet and bitter, the kind of laugh that tastes like tears. The wind caught my hair as I sat in the driver's seat, the house still glowing behind me, like a stage I'd been written out of. I took a long breath, steady, slow. My reflection in the rearview mirror didn't look broken, just done pretending. As I pulled out of the driveway, the party lights blurred into a smear of gold and red. My phone kept vibrating, but I didn't reach for it. I already knew what the messages said. Don't make a scene. Let's talk later. Be reasonable. I didn't answer. The tires rolled softly over the gravel, and the night swallowed the sound of my leaving. Somewhere inside, laughter rose again, louder than before. It didn't matter. I was done trying to be believed. And for the first time that night, the silence felt like peace. The morning came without rest. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling as the early light crept through the blinds, painting the walls in narrow bands of gold. My apartment smelled faintly of cinnamon, the kind that lingers after a holiday, but it felt tainted now, like sweetness turned stale. I hadn't slept. My head was a replay of last night, my mother's laughter, Dorian's smirk, the way every eye in that room shifted away from mine. The phone sat on the table beside me, dark and silent. I knew what I'd see before I even picked it up, no calls, no missed messages. Just the empty proof of distance. But one notification blinked. A text from my cousin, Camille. Sorry about last night. But maybe you should get help. This isn't healthy. The words blurred. For a second, I thought I misread them. Then I realized she meant every syllable. Not only did no one believe me, they thought I was unstable. I pressed the phone to my chest, breathing slowly, trying to make the air behave. The quiet felt wrong. It wasn't peace anymore. It was exile. I got up and walked barefoot across the hardwood floor. The winter air had a dry chill that clung to everything. I brewed coffee out of habit, not hunger. The smell reminded me of mornings when things were simple, before money became a measure of worth and love was something you had to prove. When I opened my laptop, my stomach sank. The family email thread, the one where birthdays, recipes, and announcements used to fill my inbox, was gone. Deleted or blocked, I couldn't tell. A new thread sat above it, bolded and unread. The subject line read, "Family first, keep the peace." I opened it. My name wasn't on the recipients list. I checked social media next, even though I promised myself I wouldn't. Photos from the party flooded my screen, Dorian holding champagne, Marla glowing beside him, my father clapping like the world was right again. "Family is everything," one caption said. Every smile was perfect, every light flattering, every memory curated. I wasn't in a single frame. They hadn't ignored me. They had erased me. I closed the laptop slowly, gently, as if shutting it could soften the hurt. But the weight stayed. I wandered to the closet and found the shoebox I hadn't opened in years. Inside, old ribbons and crumpled certificates rested like quiet ghosts. I picked up one, an award from a writing contest I'd won at 12. I could still remember the moment, the envelope, my name read aloud, the pride in my chest. But the memory twisted when I thought of what came after. "Ryan deserves to go," my mother had said, standing in the kitchen that night, arms folded, voice firm. "He's more outgoing. You'll understand when you're older." Ryan, another golden boy in a long line of them, went to the writing camp that was supposed to be mine. I stayed home and pretended not to care. That was the first time I learned how love could sound like fairness and still mean sacrifice. I sat on the floor, box in my lap, staring at the faded letter from the contest organizers. The edges were yellow now, the ink smudged, but my name was still there. Proof of who I was before they decided who I should be. By afternoon, the sun had sharpened, slicing through the blinds in thin beams. My living room felt smaller than usual. The TV played an old sitcom rerun I didn't remember turning on. I lay on the couch, still wearing the sequined dress from the night before. The glitter scratched my skin, each sparkle like a reminder of how ridiculous I'd looked standing there, trembling in front of everyone. I opened my phone and began deleting pictures. Not in anger, just release. Photos of birthdays, reunions, vacations. Smiles that no longer meant anything. I paused at one, my father and me at a science fair, years ago. He had a hand on my shoulder, proud and quiet. Back then, silence felt like safety. Now it was suffocation. He didn't say much, I whispered. But at least he showed up. The phone buzzed again. My chest tightened. I knew who it was before I saw the name. Marla. Please don't ruin what's left of the holidays. Let it go. No greeting. No question if I was all right. Just control, disguised as calm. I stared at the message until the words lost meaning. Then I pressed delete. The sound of the click echoed too loud in the quiet apartment. I got up and poured another cup of coffee, though the first one sat untouched. Outside, the sun was dipping behind the rooftops, turning the sky a soft rose color that didn't match my mood. I leaned against the counter, tracing a crack on the mug's handle with my thumb. How easily they could move on. How quickly love turned conditional. My phone buzzed once more, an alert from the group chat I wasn't in. Someone had tagged family only. I laughed softly, bitterly, because that was the point. I sat back down at my desk, opened my laptop again, and this time, I didn't go to social media or email. I opened a search bar. Typed legal template for unauthorized withdrawal. If they wouldn't hear me, they would have to face me. Quietly. Methodically. The cursor blinked at me, patient and relentless. I could almost hear Dorian's voice from last night, prove it. I would. Not for them. For the version of me who believed truth mattered more than image. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. The apartment lights flickered on automatically as the desert dusk deepened outside. Somewhere, I could hear the faint hum of neighbors cooking dinner, laughing faintly at something I'd never know. The sound was ordinary, grounding. I closed my eyes for a moment and let the stillness wrap around me. Gently, quietly, softly. Healing doesn't arrive like thunder. It slips in through silence. Tomorrow, I'd begin again, not as the daughter who stayed quiet, but as the woman they tried to forget. And this time, they'd remember. 2 weeks passed in a blur of repetition, coffee, work, silence. Days folded into each other until time lost its edges. Even the pain softened, not gone, but dulled, humming beneath the surface like distant traffic outside a window. The kind of noise you stop noticing until it stops, and the quiet becomes unbearable. It was Friday evening when my phone lit up with a message from Layla, a friend from college I hadn't spoken to in months. Thought you'd want to see this. A link followed. I almost didn't open it. I'd promised myself I was done watching their lives from afar. But curiosity has its own kind of gravity, it pulls even the steady ones back toward what they swore they'd left behind. The link opened to a live stream. A gala. Golden light flooded the room, soft and expensive, the kind of light designed to make deception look dignified. A banner hung behind the podium in polished letters. Visionary of the Year, presented to Dorian Carr. My breath caught. For a moment, I couldn't move. Then applause filled the speakers, smooth, polite, endless. And there he was. Dorian. My cousin. The man who built his empire on family and falsehood. He wore a navy suit, the color of trust. My parents stood beside him, radiant. My father's smile looked 20 years younger. My mother rested her hand on Dorian's arm like a queen presenting her heir. The host's voice filled the ballroom. A man who represents integrity, innovation, and family values. Integrity. The word hit like a stone skipping across my chest. When Dorian stepped up to the microphone, his tone was flawless, calm, gracious, practiced. I wouldn't be here without the quiet support of someone who always believed in me. Thank you, Doreen. He said my name. The room laughed politely, as if sharing an inside joke. He smiled like he meant it, like my silence had been some noble act of loyalty. The audience didn't know what that thank you cost. He was rewriting the story again, turning my absence into endorsement, my quiet into consent. Making me complicit in my own erasure. I muted the video, but his image lingered on the screen, the charming smile, the applause, my mother's adoring glance. They were proud. Of him. I closed the laptop. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful, it pressed against my ribs until I could barely breathe. The words, quiet support, circled in my head until they stopped sounding like English. Until they just sounded cruel. My phone buzzed again, Layla calling. I answered because the silence felt heavier than her voice. "Hey," she said softly. "You saw it?" I did. My voice felt detached, like it belonged to someone observing from far away. Was that supposed to be an apology, or a warning? Layla exhaled. "Neither. You might want to hear this, though." She sent an audio file. When I played it, the sound that filled my apartment was familiar. Too familiar. My mother's laughter. Then her voice, mid-conversation. "Dorian? He's the only one who didn't disappoint me. Jareen, she's always been difficult." The word difficult landed with surgical precision. A single, small cut that reopens every older wound. Layla spoke again through the line. "A friend of mine was at that gala 2 months ago. He was testing new recording software. He didn't mean to catch it, but he did." I didn't respond. I ended the call. The recording still played faintly through the speaker, my mother's laughter looping like a ghost that refused to leave. Always been difficult. Not wrong. Just inconvenient. Just too much for the story she preferred to tell. I had spent years trying not to be difficult, biting my tongue until it bled, softening my truths, forgiving before anyone asked. I had trimmed myself down to fit her comfort, and somehow, I was still the problem. The screen dimmed to black, and in the reflection, I saw my face, tired eyes, clenched jaw, the faint trace of mascara that had survived too many tears. I touched my cheek as if I could press the ache back into silence. Outside, fireworks lit the skyline, far away. A celebration I wasn't part of. The bursts were soft but distant, each one sinking with the tightness in my chest. I closed my eyes and saw them all, Dorian on stage, my mother laughing, my father smiling beside her. And beneath those faces, me. Younger. 12 years old. Sitting on the edge of my bed, listening to my brother unpack from the writing camp that was supposed to be mine. My mother's voice echoed from the past. "You'll understand when you're older." I did now. I understood too well. They had always chosen the sons, the saviors, the ones who looked like legacy. I went to my desk and pulled open the drawer. The red folder waited there. My quiet armor. On the cover, in clean black ink, 4 words stared back at me. They called me jealous. Inside were months of evidence, bank statements, notarized letters, digital copies of things they'd hoped would stay buried. Every lie had paperwork, and I'd kept it all. I slid one page out, the forged transaction log. My signature looped neatly across the bottom, copied but not mine. A perfect imitation. Proof that silence had a cost you could measure in ink. I laid it on the desk, turned on the printer, and listened to the hum fill the room. The machine's low rhythm sounded like a heartbeat. The paper came out warm, curling slightly at the edges. I stapled it to a new document and typed the title carefully. Unauthorized asset transfer. I stared at the page for a long time. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from focus. The kind that comes when every illusion has been stripped away, and all that's left is truth. I thought of my mother's voice from the recording. "He's the only one who didn't disappoint me." She was wrong. He disappointed her too. She just hadn't noticed yet. The clock ticked softly in the corner. I opened my email, attached the document, and began typing, deliberate and slow. "To whom it may concern. I am reporting fraudulent activity connected to the Carr Family Trust." I paused before signing my name. The cursor blinked, steady and patient, waiting for me to claim the space that had always been mine. I whispered it aloud, my name. Not the version she used to guilt me. Not the one he used to brand me. Just mine. Then I hit send. The whoosh of the email leaving my outbox was quieter than I expected, almost gentle. But the silence that followed wasn't emptiness. It was freedom, steady and expanding. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for permission or forgiveness. I wasn't defending my place in their story. I had written my own. They had wanted a hero they could polish for their galas, a savior they could claim as theirs. They had wanted obedience dressed up as grace. But I was done being their backdrop. They wanted a public hero. I gave them a private reckoning. The printer light blinked again, waiting for another page. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The cursor pulsed, loyal and unblinking. And for the first time, I didn't feel erased. I felt intentional. Deliberate. Alive. Quietly, softly, I began again. The printer finished its slow, deliberate rhythm. I sealed the last document into a folder with a red clip, the same shade as the holiday dress I'd worn the night everything cracked open. That dress still hung in my closet, glittering like it didn't know what it had survived. I slid the folder into my worn leather bag, zipped it shut, and stood there for a moment, just breathing. Quietly. Calmly. The next morning, I found myself seated in the back corner of the city library. The scent of old books and lemon-scented floor polish wrapped around me like a memory I hadn't requested. My laptop was open. The red folder rested beside me. I wasn't hiding. I was building something they couldn't see coming. I logged into the state database and started pulling public records, deed transfers, trust amendments, business filings. I cross-checked every line with the copies I had, piecing together a timeline that no one else had dared write. They thought I was being dramatic. Unstable. Too sensitive. But I wasn't planning revenge. I was building evidence. Not to destroy them, but to unburden myself. They don't believe I'm dangerous, I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. That's their mistake. By noon, I had what I needed. I printed copies of the oldest document, one with my mother's signature on a trust update I never agreed to. She had authorized Dorian to access an account under my name. It was all there, in legal ink, notarized. I stared at the paper for a long time. Her handwriting was so familiar. The loops of her them, the clean curve of her last name. It looked like love, written into every letter. But love doesn't sign away someone's money without asking. At the county clerk's office, a woman in her 50s with a kind voice and a worn name tag looked up from my printout and nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. That signature was filed in 2020. Still active. I asked to photograph the file. She hesitated, then said quietly, "You're not the first daughter I've seen walk in with something like this." I nodded, biting down on the lump in my throat. "Be careful," she added, softer this time. "Families protect their myths." I thanked her, packed my things, and left. That evening, I met Maven at a small cafe tucked between a dentist's office and a closed-down yoga studio. She looked older than I remembered, but sharper too, like someone who'd stopped pretending life was fair. I didn't know who else to call, I admitted. "You called the right person," she said, then added, "I've been waiting for someone to fight back." I laid the red folder between us on the table. She pulled out her own manila envelope. Inside were copies of balance sheets, internal emails, and one memo that made my stomach turn. Dorian had billed my name against an unreported marketing fund. Twice. Maven pointed to a note in the corner of one page. "See this?" I leaned in. "Adjust by Q4, JC won't notice." "That's your initials." I felt the blood leave my face. "They tried to erase you," Maven said flatly. "Let's make them remember." I closed my eyes for a second. Slowly. Quietly. Letting the truth settle. That night, back in my apartment, I wrote. For hours. I didn't eat. I didn't check the clock. I just wrote. At 2:37 a.m., I hit submit. The essay was anonymous. Titled, "What Happens When Family Loyalty Becomes Financial Abuse." I signed it, "Someone you called jealous." My hand shook, not from fear, but from the weight of telling the truth in public, even if no one knew it was me. The next window on my screen was a draft email. The message to my parents was only one sentence. "If you don't stop protecting him, I will make sure the law does." I stared at it. Hovered over, send. But I didn't press it. Not yet. Instead, I turned off the light, let the apartment go quiet, and allowed myself a full breath. For the first time in weeks, I felt the edge of my anger softening. Not disappearing. Just loosening its grip. I no longer needed to scream to be heard. I only needed receipts. The printer began humming again in the corner, printing out one more document. I walked over, gently took the warm paper, and added it to the folder. This time, when I sealed the clip, it felt final. Not like an end, more like the beginning of a new kind of silence. One I chose. One they couldn't edit. The printer stopped with a soft whir and fell silent. So did I. For a long moment, I didn't move. The final page slid into the tray, the last in a stack of evidence I hadn't planned to gather, but now couldn't unsee. I reached for the red folder and ran my fingers across its smooth cover. I didn't feel victory. I didn't feel relief. What I felt was heavier than that. Quieter. It wasn't the weight of paper I carried now, It was the kind of shift that happens in your spine when the truth finally has somewhere to go. A message I no longer needed permission to deliver. That afternoon, I walked up the familiar brick path to my parents' house. The roses lining the walkway had been pruned too neatly, just enough to impress the neighbors, not enough to invite anyone in. The porch lights were already on, even though the sky was still full of daylight. They always were, as if overcompensation could be mistaken for warmth. I rang the doorbell and waited. Marla opened the door. Her mouth was a tight line, like she'd been practicing composure all day and had just hit the wall. Behind her, Harlan stood motionless. Not neutral, absent. Like someone who had learned how to be present without ever being involved. He looked like a chair no one sat in. "You could have called," she said. "I needed to be here," I replied, stepping past her. The house smelled like lemon polish and faintly of Thanksgiving, a memory more than a fragrance. Comfort curated through candles and curated silence. Above the fireplace hung a photograph of Dorian. Arms folded. Smile fixed. Dressed like someone whose trustworthiness came from a catalog. I said nothing. I placed the red folder on the dining table. Marla folded her arms. "This is your idea of solving things? This," I said, meeting her eyes, "is your chance to make things right, before it leaves this house for good." She laughed then. Not loud, not hysterical, just sharp, tired, and hollow. "What you're doing is disgusting," she said, voice trembling at the edge. "No," I replied, calm. "What you're allowing is." She opened the folder, fingers shaking ever so slightly. She scanned the top page and didn't ask where I got it. That told me everything. I turned to leave. "Joreen," Harlan's voice stopped me. Quiet. Uncertain. I didn't turn around. "You knew," I said. "You just didn't want to deal with the mess." No one answered. That silence, once suffocating, now felt like proof. An hour later, I was in Maven's car, parked outside the family lawyer's office. The engine hummed quietly beneath us. She sat beside me with the kind of steady calm only she knew how to summon at a time like this. She tapped her screen twice. Then hit send. The email was clean. Direct. Unapologetic. Inside it were attachments. Dozens. Shell company records. Internal memos. Forged invoices. Transfer logs with dates and digital fingerprints. Emails with initials not meant to appear. Dorian had left traces everywhere, greedy, careless fingerprints on every cent he rerouted. Every lie he told. By the time night fell, a response landed in Maven's inbox. "We've received the materials. Documents under review. You may be contacted for sworn testimony." I read the reply 3 times. The law was no longer hypothetical. No longer theoretical. It was moving. Slow, but forward. I didn't feel relief. I felt ready. The next morning, it happened. A quiet whisper on a local financial blog, tucked between articles on real estate predictions and investment tips. Sources inside Car Holdings report internal discrepancies and questionable financial practices. It wasn't national. Not yet. But it was oxygen. And it spread fast. Within hours, texts poured in. Whispers turned to questions. Questions turned to calls. Then came the inevitable one from Marla. "What have you done?" I stared at the screen. Then typed. "You should have listened. You can't parent someone by silencing them." And I hit send. Not to hurt her. To free myself. Maven called mid-afternoon. "You might want to sit down." She forwarded an email from a media contact in New York. A journalist. One of the ones who listens before they write. They were requesting verification of the files. Dorian's name had been flagged by a risk analyst. It was now a matter of public interest. This was no longer a family affair. It was record. And it was public. That evening, I drove out to the lake just past the edge of town. The one where my father used to take me as a child. We'd watch the water, skip stones, talk about constellations we couldn't name. It had always been the only place that didn't ask anything from me. I parked the car and climbed onto the hood, knees pulled to my chest, eyes locked on the ripples that moved like breath across the lake's surface. The wind picked up, threading through my hair. The air smelled like pine and possibility. My family had trained me to keep quiet. To color inside the lines. To preserve appearances. To make sure no one gets embarrassed. But the line I drew now wasn't for them. It was for me. A border-stitched not in vengeance, but in truth. Held together by facts they couldn't edit. Documented. Preserved. Undeniable. They had crossed it. And I had dared them to. I stayed there until the sun dipped low, until the sky turned that aching blue that always comes before night. And when I finally drove home, it wasn't with satisfaction. It was with certainty. They could try to twist the story. They could whisper, speculate, deflect. But the record spoke louder than all of them. And this time, it carried my name. The quiet after the blog story didn't last. It rarely does. The truth doesn't echo, it ripples, catching people who pretend they don't see it until the wave hits their feet. 2 days after the post went live, my phone buzzed with a message from Dorian. Let's talk. Just us. I owe you that much. For a long moment, I just stared at the words. It wasn't guilt. Guilt had weight, substance, remorse. His tone was clean, measured, corporate. Like a man trying to negotiate a settlement, not an apology. I should have deleted it. Instead, I typed back. Where? He chose a restaurant in Scottsdale, one of those sleek places where the wine list is longer than the dinner menu. I arrived early, not because I wanted to, but because I refused to let him see me rush. When Dorian walked in, the host greeted him like a regular. He smiled that practiced smile that had fooled judges, investors, and my parents alike. The world still saw him as golden. I saw him as hollow. Joe, he said, sliding into the seat across from me, voice warm with rehearsed familiarity. You look good. Been keeping busy? I ignored the question. Why did you ask to meet? He sighed, leaning back. Because this has gotten out of hand. I didn't know how bad it got for you. I'm sorry for making you feel left out. I almost laughed. Left out. That's what you say when someone misses a dinner invite, not when you steal half their savings. He glanced around the room more than he looked at me, scanning faces, checking who might be watching. There's no reason to drag the family through all this. We can fix it. He reached into his jacket and slid an envelope across the table. It was crisp, heavy paper, like everything about him. Let's call it a truce. One-time payout. You walk away. I opened it. $52,000. A number meant to insult, not compensate. I looked up at him. You're trying to buy silence again. You've gotten good at that. He smiled faintly. I'm trying to help you. This isn't good for anyone. You're angry. You're tired. Let's end it here. The server appeared, asking if we wanted water. I shook my head. My hands were steady on the table. His weren't. Then I saw it. A tiny red light, blinking beneath the centerpiece. I tilted my head slightly, eyes narrowing. A recording device. I spoke calmly. Is this the part where I say something you can twist into a confession? His smile faltered. You're being paranoid. I reached under the flowers, felt the cool metal, and pressed the switch. The light went dark. I set it on his plate. You brought a script, I said quietly. I brought a memory. He didn't move. Just stared at the dead recorder, his face flickering between fear and calculation. I stood, pushed the envelope back toward him, and said softly, You've mistaken my silence for surrender. That was your first mistake. I left the restaurant without looking back. When I got home, the hallway smelled faintly of old carpet cleaner and dust. There was an envelope on the floor, slipped under my door. No return address. Inside was a printed invoice from my consulting firm, my name at the top, my signature forged at the bottom. A payment for services never rendered. A new game. His game. My phone rang before I could process it. Maven's name flashed on the screen. He's trying to bury you before you bury him, she said without greeting. I got the same email from his lawyer. He's fabricating paperwork. My pulse steadied, not quickened. Then we're done playing defense. She hesitated. Do you trust me? I trust the truth, I said. Maven paused again. I know a guy. Used to be a private investigator. Got out after a scandal, but he still owes me a favor. Then call him. She sighed. He's not cheap. I've already paid enough. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the fake invoice. It was flawless. Even the date stamp matched the style my assistant used to format files. Dorian had learned to imitate everything, signatures, tone, sincerity. But he never learned restraint. I opened my laptop and saved copies of the forgery, then printed 3 versions. One for Maven, one for the investigator, one for me. Evidence doesn't lie, even when people do. Sleep didn't come easy. I kept hearing his voice, polite, measured, dripping with false calm. Let's not drag the family through this. He wasn't protecting them. He was protecting the myth of himself. The next morning, I met Maven at a diner on the outskirts of town. She handed me a phone number scribbled on a napkin. He'll meet you today. Don't mention my name. I nodded. What should I expect? A man who used to clean up corporate messes. Now he exposes them. By afternoon, I was standing outside a small office above an auto shop. The blinds were half closed, the paint on the door chipped. Inside, the smell of stale coffee and burned paper hit like memory. The investigator was in his 60s, gray stubble, shirt wrinkled but eyes sharp. He looked up as I entered. You're the one with the family fraud case, he said, voice gravelly. I nodded. And you're the one who doesn't scare easy. He chuckled dryly. Not anymore. What's your target? I placed the red folder on his desk. Dorian Carr. My cousin. He flipped through the documents slowly. His eyebrows lifted once. You've got real evidence here. But you're missing one thing, proof of intent. He turned the laptop toward me. A frozen frame showed Dorian at the restaurant last night. The image came from a camera outside the building. You'll want to see what he's been hiding, the investigator said. I leaned closer. The screen flickered, and I saw an image of Dorian shaking hands with a man I didn't recognize, someone wearing a Carr Holdings badge. A partner in crime. My stomach twisted. He thought he was paying you off, the investigator said quietly. Turns out, he was laundering money through dummy contracts. I exhaled slowly. How long until this goes public? Depends on how loud you're willing to get. I smiled faintly. I don't need to be loud. I just need to be right. He nodded. Then we'll start tonight. As I gathered my things, I felt the tension ease, not gone, but rearranged into purpose. He thought I was the problem to be paid off. But I was the reckoning he couldn't write off. The screen illuminated the investigator's face, the cold glow slicing through the dimness of the small room. Shadows collected in the corners, moving slightly as the video began to play. I sat beside him, spine straight but hands folded tight in my lap. The room smelled like dust and scorched plastic, burned wire, old paper, something faintly metallic. I'd come to recognize that scent. It was the smell of exposure, of something buried being dragged into light. The audio crackled. Then came his voice. Dorian. Smooth. Confident. Almost bored. She's emotional. All I need is one quote and a check. Then that laugh. That low, knowing sound he used whenever he was sure he had the room wrapped around his finger. The sound of a man mistaking arrogance for power. And if it gets messy, well, her mother owes me. I saved that family once. The bile hit the back of my throat before I realized I'd stopped breathing. From behind me, Maven's hand settled gently on my shoulder. Her touch was steady, no pity, no shock. Just presence. A confirmation that I wasn't imagining it. I spoke, though my voice barely carried above the hum of the monitor. He's not just exploiting me. He's weaponizing history. Maven nodded once, quietly. She reached forward, ejected the flash drive from the laptop, and slipped it into her pocket with the same care you'd give to evidence that could change the course of something long overdue. We don't need anything else, she said. This is it. A few days later, I found myself in a downtown hotel ballroom, the kind that smelled faintly of perfume, carpet cleaner, and ego. The invitation had been for a panel on ethics and innovation. I'd told myself I should go, that it was time to be seen again. Not as a scandal. Not as a victim. But as someone who still belonged in rooms like this. The lighting was too warm, the smiles too polished. Conversations buzzed like flies, business cards exchanged, names repeated with forced familiarity. During the break, I moved toward the coffee table, head high, posture perfect. I was halfway across the room when I heard it. A woman's voice. Sharp. Amused. That's her, the one who lost $500,000 to her cousin. Messy. The words landed like a slap that didn't sting, but bruised. I didn't turn. Didn't look for the face that said it. I kept walking. Chin level. Steps even. The trick wasn't pretending you didn't hear. The trick was not letting the echo live inside you. But when I entered the restroom, I locked myself inside a stall and sat down on the closed lid, my breath catching. My hands trembled, not with fear, but with fury that had nowhere left to go. They weren't laughing at what he did. They were laughing at what I became. A woman who lost money. A woman who named her abuser. A woman who kept going anyway. The sob came out of me before I could stop it. Small. Contained. Private. It wasn't collapse, it was release. I stayed there until my breathing steadied. And then I remembered what Layla once told me. The line that had become my compass. Truth doesn't need a crowd. It needs consistency. I wiped my face, straightened my blazer, and walked back out. Not flawless, but composed. When I got home that night, my phone light blinked, one voicemail. Marla. Her voice filled the kitchen like smoke. Soft, practiced, detached. He helped us when your father's business was about to collapse. You'll understand when you're older. Even recorded, her tone managed to sound both maternal and manipulative. She didn't mention Dorian by name. She didn't have to. And there it was. The debt. Not financial, emotional. The unspoken contract binding her loyalty to him. She had built her morality on a ledger, balancing guilt with gratitude. That was why she defended him. Why she watched me drown in the aftermath and said nothing. It wasn't that she believed him. It was that she believed she couldn't afford not to. For the first time, everything made sense, the hollow reassurances, the deflections, the practiced denial. She wasn't protecting the truth. She was protecting her version of history, one where she was the saved, not the accomplice. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't pour a drink or scroll through the headlines. I opened my laptop. The cursor blinked against the blank screen like a pulse. A challenge. I titled the document. Car holdings under scrutiny for internal fraud, family member speaks out. Then I began to attach the files, the red folder that had been gathering weight over the months. Financial documents, hidden transfers, copies of forged authorizations, email chains, timestamps. And finally, the audio file, the recording of Dorian's voice, careless and cruel. Before I closed the draft, I added a short statement at the top. This is not revenge. This is record. And at the bottom, I wrote my full name. Not initials. Not anonymous. Just Doreen Carr. I took a deep breath and hit send. 3 journalists. 3 separate outlets. 3 chances for the truth to grow legs. Not to destroy him. Not to shame her. To reclaim my name. The next morning, the world moved quickly. At 7:02 a.m., my phone buzzed, 3 times. 3 missed calls. All from Marla. Then, a text. Come home. Now. The words stared back at me, glowing against the screen, almost identical to the message that had started all of this months ago. I didn't move. I didn't call back. I just sat on the edge of my bed and watched the light shift across the wall. Outside, the city was waking. The world was going on. But for once, I didn't feel behind it. I didn't feel small. I didn't feel erased. The truth was no longer just a secret in a folder. It was alive. Documented. Witnessed. Out there where it couldn't be silenced again. For years, they had treated my silence like an inheritance, something expected, something owed. But silence is not loyalty. It's debt. And I had finally paid it in full. In the reflection of my darkened laptop screen, I caught my own face, not defiant, not vengeful. Just steady. This wasn't triumph. It was clarity. They had built their house on deception. I had chosen to walk out and leave the door open behind me, so the light could follow. Some people inherit money. Some inherit legacy. And some inherit lies, and decide that their name deserves better. That morning, I made coffee, opened the window, and let the air move freely through the room. The scent of burnt truth still lingered faintly, but it no longer made me flinch. Because exposure doesn't always destroy. Sometimes, it purifies. And as the sunlight reached across the floor, I whispered, to no one in particular, maybe to myself. They wanted obedience. I gave them evidence. The message from my mother lit up my screen. Just 3 words, but they carried all the weight of years that came before them. Come home. Now. It wasn't a request. It never was. For a while, I just stared at it, thumb hovering over the screen. The word home didn't evoke warmth anymore. It meant battle lines. It meant walking into a house that once raised me and now expected me to stay silent, no matter the cost. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the sky above Charleston had softened into that slow-burn sunset, all bruised oranges and long gold shadows. The house looked smaller than I remembered, shrinking under the pressure of its own secrets. The shutters were drawn. The porch light, always a little too eager, was already on, even though the sun hadn't completely disappeared. There was a news van parked 2 doors down. Inside, the air was thick and unmoving, like the house had forgotten how to breathe. Dust hovered in the corners. My mother sat on the edge of the sofa, spine straight as a ruler. Her posture too controlled to be casual. My father paced the room, hands shoved into the pockets of a jacket he didn't seem to realize he'd put on inside out. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The television was muted, but the headline was impossible to miss. Car holdings under investigation, family fraud claims widen. Marla didn't cry. She never did. But her voice betrayed her. "If you care at all, you'll help us manage this," she said, her eyes on mine. "Dorian's your cousin. You can't let them destroy him." Her face was hard to read, controlled but worn. Diminished, not defeated. Still powerful, but chipped around the edges. The porcelain woman of our childhood, cracking in places she couldn't repair. I studied her for a long moment. "Mom," I said slowly, "he's not the only one who forged something." Her eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" I unzipped my bag and pulled out the folder I'd been carrying for weeks. I opened it carefully, as if revealing a wound, and laid the signed loan documents on the coffee table, each page stamped, dated, notarized. Each one bearing her signature. "You did, too." The room froze. My father stopped pacing. He stared at the documents like they might catch fire. The color drained from his face. Marla's hands curled into fists on her lap. Her voice was low. "You don't understand what it was like back then. We had to keep the business afloat. We didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice," I said, the edge in my voice sharp but controlled. "And you chose him. Every single time." Harlan tried to speak. His voice cracked before the sentence could form. "We thought he'd help. He promised." I turned to him, my tone unwavering. He helped himself. "You signed away everything I worked for because you were too afraid to confront the truth. You let him draw the line, and then you stepped over it for him." Marla's eyes shimmered, but the tears didn't fall. They weren't for me. They were for the illusion she could no longer hold together. The television flickered. Footage of Dorian being escorted into the courthouse looped in silence. His suit looked slept in. His once charming smile had faded into something sunken, hollow. He blinked too often under the camera flashes, like the truth finally burned. A reporter's voice cut through faintly. "Sources confirm Car Holdings executives face multiple fraud allegations. One insider source claims a family member's testimony was key to the investigation." Marla's hand flew to her mouth. "They're saying it's you," she whispered. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. The next morning, I stood across the street from the courthouse, coat pulled tight against the chill that crept in through Charleston's early light. Journalists gathered at the foot of the steps, their microphones pointed like weapons. Cameras clicked, bright and invasive. One spotted me. "Miss Carr. Can we get a statement?" I kept walking. I wasn't here for them. Inside, I slipped into a seat near the back. Maven was already on the stand. Her voice was clear, her composure unwavering. "He knew exactly what he was doing," she said. "And so did the people who looked away." Her words dropped into the courtroom like stones into still water. Rippling. My mother flinched slightly in the front row. No one noticed. But I did. By evening, the news cycle had spun into overdrive. Car Holdings board suspends operations. Shareholders withdraw support. Carr family scandal deepens. I scrolled through the updates like someone reading a story they used to live in, but no longer belonged to. And then, buried between financial analysis and legal speculation, came the headline I didn't expect. "Celeste Carr speaks." I clicked. Just one line, quoted from a brief interview with a reporter outside her home. "I lost faith in that boy when he forged my granddaughter's name. I should have seen it earlier." That was all. No elaboration. No dramatics. Just a fracture repaired in a sentence. A silence lifted. A quiet vote of truth. I put down my phone and closed my eyes. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure. Small, Fragile. But real. That night, my phone rang. Cashin. His voice was a thread I didn't know I'd missed. Steady. Familiar. Now that the storm's passed, he said, are you ready to build something no one can tear down? I let the question hang for a moment. Then I smiled. It wasn't forced. It came from somewhere deep and grounded. Let's start with the foundation, I said. Mine. There was a pause on the other end. The kind that holds understanding rather than silence. When we hung up, I stood in the living room of my apartment, letting the air settle around me. It felt different, lighter, somehow. The walls, the furniture, even the light filtering through the windows. As if the house itself had been holding its breath, waiting for me to come back whole. Some people spend their lives trying to rebuild their families. Others spend theirs trying to survive them. I had done both. And now, finally, I was ready to build something better. Not on inherited loyalty. Not on silence. But on truth. Because sometimes legacy is about what you keep. And sometimes, it's about what you finally let go. 3 months later, I stood outside a modest brick building on the edge of downtown. The morning sun stretched long shadows across the sidewalk, soft light spilling through the old glass panes of the office door. A new sign, freshly bolted into place, read, Hayes & Company, Financial Ethics and Recovery. I rested my hand on the door for a second before turning the handle. The smell of new paint and polished wood greeted me. The space was small, 1 room, 2 desks, a tiny break area, but it was mine. I placed a single photo on the shelf behind the desk. Me and my father, years ago, at my high school science fair. His hand on my shoulder. His face younger, mine unsure but proud. A quiet moment of encouragement I hadn't realized I'd been carrying all this time. Cashin arrived not long after, holding 2 coffees, his tie crooked in a way that made me smile. Clients are already waiting, he said, handing me a cup. I didn't feel like a hero. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. That was enough. Later that day, I returned to my apartment to check mail. A plain white envelope sat among the bills. No return address. Inside was a note in my father's handwriting. You were right. I see it now. I'm sorry I didn't stand up when you needed me. Harlan. I folded the paper slowly and slipped it into a drawer. There were no tears. Some apologies come too late to matter, but they still close something. That weekend, I visited Celeste at the care home. The receptionist waved me through, calling me Miss Carr, the way people used to with a hint of reverence. My grandmother sat by the window, her eyes cloudy but alert. She reached out with a trembling hand when she saw me. I used to think loyalty meant silence, she said, voice soft as cotton. You taught me better. I sat beside her, gently taking her hand. I just needed someone to say I wasn't the problem. You never were, she whispered, squeezing my fingers. The moment was quiet. Healing doesn't arrive in grand gestures. It sneaks in slowly, like sun through heavy curtains. That night, I walked my usual route home, past the flower shop, the rusted newspaper stand, the mural someone had painted over with hope. My phone buzzed. A text from Marla. Do you still hate me? I stopped under the soft yellow glow of a streetlight. Typed slowly. No. But I'm done asking for your belief. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. Then I hit delete. Instead, I opened a new message. Wrote 1 line. I don't need you to believe me anymore. I believe me. I didn't hit send. I didn't need to. The next morning, a small girl waited in the office lobby with her mother. Her eyes scanned the bookshelf until they landed on a framed quote behind my desk. You're not difficult. You're just not designed to be silenced. She tilted her head, reading it again, then looked up at me. What's your name, sweetheart? I asked. She smiled. Ellie. Nice to meet you, Ellie, I said softly. Let's get started. Justice didn't restore the past. But it protected who I became. Sometimes, healing doesn't mean making them see what they did, it means finally seeing yourself without their distortion. If you've ever had to walk away to find peace, tell me, what did you leave behind, and what did you finally gain? Don't forget to subscribe for more true stories about quiet strength, untold truths, and the courage it takes to start over.